Okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and flesh these out a bit. Some things to keep in mind. For the adult, the eyes are roughly halfway from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin. And as you get younger, that changes. So the eye line, instead of being in the middle, it gets lower. So for the 15 to 18-year-old, it's not going to be that different. But for the younger children, it will be. So for the baby, what I would do is, and something else I'll talk about with the baby's head, is that babies have bigger craniums, and the bottom of the jaw. So let me just draw a head here, and let's say this is an adult. You can see how the jaw is quite angular, and you get this shape. With babies, what happens is this is much softer, and you tend to get fat stored, so it's more like this shape instead of an angled shape. And it doesn't mean the jaw is not like the jawbone, it's actually pretty small on young kids, but that's not just why it's that way, because otherwise you'd get like a more pointy chin. It's that you also have to consider the baby fat. So there's that. So I'm gonna do this baby, and so it's almost like more like a square, a boxy look when you're doing babies. And if you divide the face in half, then you just know the eyes are going to be not in the middle, but just below that. So you can put in roughly where the eyes go, and then where the nose goes in the mouth. And that's looking quite young. And get in, the ears. And gives them pudgy cheeks. And, really what you can do then is just look at the adult and see the way the features go and what's defined, and look at the baby and just realize that, okay, we got to get from here to here. So all these have got to be heading in that direction. So when you're drawing a 15-year-old, you know that, well, he's going to be more angular, and it's going to get progressively more angular. There's going to be less of that baby fat. The eyes are going to be closer to the middle as opposed to below the middle. So that's what's going to help you. And then you don't really need to rely on specific tutorials so much, because it's more about you using your own knowledge rather to find out, how is this going to look? Why does it need to look this way? So in this case, I'm going to make the eyes start to get lower than halfway, so that when we get to this young kid, we've got the proportions that are much younger. For the jaw, it's going to get progressively rounder and less pronounced. Let's give this kid some ears. And what I like to do when I draw, and this is perhaps more just style, is I like to draw kids with pretty big ears, small nose, big eyes, but below the halfway line, small mouth. So that gives a sort of childish look, but that's just, it's up to you because it's preference. And then the eyebrows for younger children, there's more of a space, especially with when you compare it to men. With men, you might have eyes where you have the eye itself, but then the eyebrow's pretty close. Whereas for children, you could have the eye, and then the eyebrows still can be pretty high up, and it can be more, light, like softer. And another thing is when you draw older people, usually more of the iris is obscured, and usually the pupil is touching the top portion of the eyelid, the upper lid, whereas with really young babies, you can actually have it so the whole pupil is visible. So you get the difference between an older eye and a young eye. Okay, so for this one, so I'm keeping in mind that, okay, there's going to be a bit less distance from the eyebrow to the eye as you get older, until when you have the adult, then can be lower. And again, these are just generalizations, so you got to find what works in the case of, from person to person. It's not always going to be the same. And get some ears in. And usually, as I said, I make the ears kind of more obvious for children. And if you recall from proportions of the face, the ears are usually roughly from the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose level. And of course with babies, because the eyebrows are higher or appear higher, it's not gonna, the top part's not gonna line up with the eyebrows, but it will line up usually with the bottom of the nose. And just get some small nose, and the nose is going to be smaller and less pronounced for younger people. And you might notice that, I just want to redo this face because it's terrible. You might notice that the characteristics that children have are much more similar to the characteristics that women have. So when I mentioned the softer features, the rounder jawline, the increased space between the top of the eye and the eyebrow, then these are all things that are also in common with women. And there are theories as to why this is the case, that they're evolutionary cues that humans, when they see young children and they see those proportions, for men anyway, they feel a need to view that as cute. And then when it's cute, you want to protect it. You know that it's more vulnerable. And if it's more, angular, it seems more strong and less necessary to protect it. So, I don't know. It's just what I've heard. A theory. Okay, and now for the neck. Let's see. For the male who is an adult, it's going to be thicker. You're going to have more muscular definition. I'm not going to spend too much time on fleshing it out too much, but you can see, you know, that it's definitely going to be more muscular than the other ages. And the thighs as well are going to be thicker. So then when you know that, then it's like, okay, so what about kids? Younger people, it's going to be the opposite, right? So you can sort of do it that way. It's like, well, of course, so now the neck's going to be thinner. So when you're drawing younger kids, you think that way. You think, okay, the neck's going to be thinner. There's going to be less definition. So instead of drawing a lot, you'll probably draw quite a bit less. And this is what's going to give you the different age. The hands in there. The thighs aren't going to be as big as an adult, so. And same thing as you go younger. Something I tend to do nowadays is to exaggerate the skinniness of the arms and the legs. And one of the reasons for this is just, well, part of it is style. And the other thing is, what I noticed is I tend to make them too fat usually, or too thick. So to combat that, I started making things little exaggerated and less thick, and it sort of looked a bit more in some ways realistic, just because things aren't always as thick as you think they are. And so when I have like a really young kid, and this is exaggerating it perhaps a bit too much, but I'm okay with giving them pretty thin arms and legs. Now this is going to change though when you get closer to the baby, because babies have a lot of fat, so you can't just make them super skinny, because that will look pretty messed up. But you get a lot of skinny kids. I guess that's changing now, but when I was growing up, there's a lot of skinny kids. And you want to keep this slope of the shoulder a lot more smooth. So here with the adult, it's pretty, boxy. And then for the younger kid, the neck's going to be much more soft and delicate, and then that slope is going to be a little more soft as well. And now for the really young kid, the neck's going to be really not too defined, and the shoulders come up. I'm going to make the arms a little more fat, and I think I brought the hands a bit too low. But it's kind of easier to see when you're drawing it and then to fix it than to always just focus on numbers, you know, like, oh, this is 4 heads down, so it needs to be this way. I think it's important to not underestimate your own eyes, and what you can see is wrong. And a lot of this will just resolve itself from practice. So you don't have to feel too bad if you can't nail proportions down really quick, because you'll get better at seeing the proportions. And as mentioned, for the baby, I'm even gonna just make it like this, so there's barely even any neck visible at this point. Everything's gonna be pretty pudgy and round, so my lines are a lot of these type of lines and less straight. And then I think after this I will go ahead and kind of show my method that's more perhaps practical, that I actually use when drawing poses, because got this done, but so far there's not really any, there's not movement, and it's pretty unreasonable to think you would just draw like this all the time. It's more a case of you would draw this way or use this as reference in the beginning, and then kind of get used to the shapes you get, and from there you just get better and better at not needing these kind of things. And sometimes like this, like the kid looks weird because usually kids have clothes. So let's say I give him like a t-shirt and some shorts. Instantly it's gonna look more, I don't know, like a kid than just, I don't know. And some hair. And then if someone's like, yeah, this is a 9-year-old kid, it's okay. It's like, yeah, okay, sure, I can see that. Just adding a bit of detail to his shirt. Make it have stripes. Give him some shoes. And so this is kind of, where you can go with it. You start off getting the proportions, and it looks a bit odd at times, but then once you flesh it out, it makes a lot more sense.